Szanowni Państwo, dziś mam przyjemność polecić kolejną książkę naszego patrona, wydawnictwa Deregio, pod tytułem Prawdziwy Izrael, fałszywy judaizm, autorstwa księdza Jeana-Michel Gleize. Jest to, można by powiedzieć, teologiczny i filozoficzny tour de force o tym, czym jest judaizm, o jego esencji, metodą scholastyczną, prowadzenie ku prawdzie bez żadnej politycznej poprawności i zbędnych, że tak powiem, ekumenizmów. Tę książkę i inne znajdziecie w linku wydawnictwa Deregio, który to link jest dzisiaj załączony w naszym programie. Polecam bardzo serdecznie. Dr Michał Krupa.
Hello, everyone. It's Mike Krupa again for DR Global, the English-speaking podcast of Do Rzeczy, Poland's largest conservative weekly. It's great to see you guys again. Guys, remember to subscribe and like our channel. We just launched last week, but it'll very much help in the growth of our channel in the future. Also, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Deregio Publishing House. And in that vein, I would like to highly recommend one of Deregio's most popular books. It's 100 Years of Modernism for a Polish-speaking audience. It's authored by Father Dominic Bourmond. And, for a lot of Catholic observers, people of the church, the last 60 years after Vatican II have basically been a mess. This book really traces the origins of modernism, that sickness, that virus that has taken over Holy Mother Church and is responsible for so much of what we're seeing today, unfortunately, in the Vatican and the broader church. Make sure to check out Deregio Publishing House website. The link is in our description box. Hopefully, you'll find something for yourself or for your close ones. Christmas season is coming up. It'll be a great time to get a nice present. And believe me, Deregio has some excellent books right now that'll definitely bring satisfaction to the mind and to the soul. Guys, I'm very excited for today's episode. Today we have with us all the way from Lake Jackson, Texas, the one and only Daniel McAdams. Daniel is executive director of the Ron Paul Institute. Who doesn't love Ron Paul? He is the co-host also of the Ron Paul Liberty Report. He is a former senior staffer to U.S. Representative Ron Paul when Ron Paul was still defending liberty and truth in the United States Congress. And he is also a traditionalist Catholic. He even claims to be sedevacante on his X account. Maybe in some future discussion, we'll go into the theological debates about that. But today with Daniel, we want to focus more on the internal dynamics which are afflicting the United States right now and hopefully bring some clear perspectives to our audience. Dan, how are you this evening?
I'm fantastic. Thanks so much for having me on.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Dan, I want to start off with the latest conflagration and civil war that's taking place in the on the American right, or even sort of within the American Republican Party. Just before this interview, I talked to Andrew Day of the American Conservative, and I made this comparison that President Trump has recently been calling a lot of his former loyal supporters traitors, while his ambassador in Israel is meeting with the literal traitor, Jonathan Pollard, which I find kind of surprising. And as a matter of fact, before we did this interview, after I talked to Andrew, I actually noticed that Carolyn Levitt, the White House spokesperson, said that Ambassador Huckabee basically has the full support of the president in his capacity as ambassador to Israel. So one can infer from that the president does support meeting with literal traitors to the American Republic. I definitely want to get your insight about the current stage of the Republican/right civil war over Israel, and where do you think that's going to go in the near future?
Well, it's fascinating to watch. I never thought I would see it happen. I grew up essentially in the Republican Party. When I lived in Central Europe in the 90s, I was part of the Republicans abroad in Hungary. I was a vice chair, campaigned for Pat Buchanan in 2000. So it's interesting to see a lot of the undercurrents that Buchanan himself represented, starting even in 1992 in his bid for the presidency. Then a lot of those were off limits, were not acceptable for conversation, even though what he was speaking was the truth and always has been the truth. And now we're seeing all of a sudden these things are breaking out into the open, where these ideas are being discussed openly. And you're seeing, and I think it's definitely driven by a younger generation of conservatives who did flock to President Trump 2.0, probably more than they did in 2016, primarily because of his promises of America first, because he's talking about taking us out of wars, ending wars, not getting involved in other countries, non-interventionism. He reached out to libertarians as well, and that didn't hurt him at all. He reached out to Elon Musk before the election during the campaign, talking about cutting government radically, and that appealed to a lot of people, especially our Gen Z over here, who are feeling the brunt of the excesses of the boomer generation particularly, and even the generation that followed it. So what you're seeing now is a generation-driven split in the Republican Party between those who actually want to put America first, i.e. to stop meddling in the affairs of foreign countries. And one of those countries that has taken up probably the most American time and effort and money and international political capital has been our relationship with Israel. And that's why they're starting to argue very effectively that this is not a productive relationship for the United States. Many would argue it's not a productive relationship for Israel either. It's kind of an abusive marriage that both sides would do well to get out of. But of course, once this broke out, particularly in light of October 7th, 2023, once this started getting out of the bag, and of course it happened because of the Israeli reaction to October 7th and this slaughter of men, women, and children, everything that moves in Gaza, it motivated young people who are driven by a new type of social media, very short form social media, emotional, it sort of spawns emotions. And that has completely, I think, captivated a younger generation. And they say, well, the Bush wing of the party, the Cheney wing of the party, this is over. We don't want the neocons running things anymore. And that's what we're seeing now. It's a massive, massive split. And the other side, the traditional, the neocon Republicans who got in during the Reagan administration primarily, they're desperate. They're blocked into a corner and they're doing everything they can to stop the debate.
In a way, former Vice President Dick Cheney's death a couple of days back in his subsequent funeral last Thursday, I believe, was interpreted by many as the death of what many call Bush republicanism, which basically was very much in favor of foreign policy, interventionism, and especially of being always and everywhere on the side of Israel. I'm noticing, however, that in this reaction to a lot of this, awakening, if we could call it that, on the Israel issue on the right, in many ways due to thanks to people such as, Tucker Carlson, Ron Paul, the work that you guys do, Representative Thomas Massie, even the Epstein affair in its own kind of sick way opened the eyes of a lot of people. Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, that whole crowd. But on the other hand, I'm seeing a huge backlash of centers of power and influence with a lot of potential. Here I'm thinking of, the Mark Levins, Ted Cruz, who I don't think has a day where he doesn't criticize Tucker Carlson on X, that they do indeed really want to bring back or sort of resuscitate, in a way, Dick Cheney republicanism and bring it back. And my question to you is, you've been on the inside, you've seen a lot of what takes place on the Hill, the power centers. Who do you think, as of today, has the potential to eventually win this war and move, the right / the Republican Party more towards realism or back towards neoconservatism / Bushism?
Yeah, I would actually take it back a little further. And I know it's rather an oversimplification, but this didn't really start with Bush. And I mentioned Reagan. I love Reagan for a lot of reasons. First of all, he was such a great communicator and seemed like such a genuinely nice person. But nevertheless, one of his big mistakes was to allow the disaffected liberal Trotskyites from intellectuals from New York into the party under the guise of promoting democracy. The whole goal was to destroy the evil empire, to take down the Soviet Union. And the idea was that there are no enemies in this fight. Well, we're learning that there actually are enemies in this fight. You brought in people who wanted to, their whole thing was, we need to take down the Soviets, so let's give them Afghanistan, let's prop up jihadists. and empower them in Afghanistan to take out the Soviets. That's Brzezinski. Now, of course, I know that's Carter, but the intellectual vein was definitely was definitely ran through the Reagan presidency. The creation of the National Endowment for Democracy, the regime change operation globally that certainly had its run in Central and Eastern Europe in the 1990s. And I saw it up close and personal in places like Slovakia in 97, 98, and Albania, et cetera. So it really was Reagan that opened the door to these people. And it looked like a convenient tactical alliance. But, neocons are kind of like roaches. Once they get into your house, it is really hard to get them out. When you think you've got the place clean, you go in the kitchen, turn on the light, and there they are again, and they're back. And so that's what you're seeing. So it goes beyond Bush. Bush himself, and I'm talking about Bush too. Bush too was not an ideologue. He was a blank slate. And that's why the neocons loved him so much. That's like the Cheneys, the Rumsfelds of the world. Why they loved him so much is because he was basically an open book, and they were very, very happy to write chapter after chapter in his book. And that's exactly what they did. So again, they're ensconced. They don't want to give up their sinecures. They're very willing to endorse Democrats, though. Bill Kristol, of course, endorsed Kamala Harris for the presidency. They'll go wherever they think they can make a buck and support their favorite country, Israel, and also wrong foot their favorite enemy, Russia. So they are around and they've been around. As to how this dust up may end, I think ultimately demography is destiny, right? I mean, the young people will overtake the party. They will dominate the debate. They are never going back. There's a new poll out that just came out in the United States, and I don't have it right in front of me, but it shows a continued cratering of U.S. support for Israel, especially younger people, younger conservatives, and of course, and even among America First conservatives. So these people will grow up. They can shoot their leaders. They can kill their leaders, as I believe they've done recently. But they can't kill that message. And that message, in my opinion, the only danger is that, that message becomes even more extreme. But as right now, I mean, they are carrying the real America First, which of course harkens back to the 1950s in the United States. Mm-hmm. We had great senators like Robert Taft, who didn't even want the U.S. in NATO. The original America First movement, of course, was around the time of World War I, but certainly after World War II, there was a strong right-wing, you could call it isolationist, but in a good way movement. Okay, we're done. We're tired of all this. We're tired of going to Europe's wars. We're tired of running the world. Let's concentrate on our own country.
Dan, you mentioned NATO there, and it's a good subject for the current situation we have geopolitically and also internally in Poland, because I guess in Poland we're also seeing a sort of split between the old guard, which is mostly associated with Law and Justice, the Law and Justice Party, and I would say generally the boomer generation, and the younger generation of conservatives who are mostly aligned with the Confederation Party and the Confederation of the Polish Crown Party, which is Grzegorz Braun's party, who are taking a more, I would say, nuanced and multipolar view of the world. And, to the boomers, even to our national security advisor, Professor Cęckiewicz, I'm talking about the national security advisor to the President Nawrocki, obviously, he recently said, this is a perfect, example of this boomer type thinking, in an interview with the Financial Times, that, we in the presidential palace are Atlanticists, we're pro-American, and basically there's no alternative to NATO. But, you're seeing this from the inside of the movement that is formally in power right now, the right. And there are so many debates happening in and around NATO and the future of NATO. I mean, I saw Senator Lee making, the noises on X whether NATO should even exist. What is your prediction for the future of NATO as an American-dominated institution? Because I think it's important for an American to tell some of our Polish audience the reality of what NATO has become and where it's heading. What's your assessment of the alliance?
When you talk about the we're all Atlantis thing, it really makes me feel like I've walked into a Novus Ordo Catholic church with the felt banners and the avocado colors. I mean, it feels so dated, though, so dated. I I was living in Hungary when the first round of NATO accession happened, and I was absolutely opposed to it, for different reasons than I am now. At the time, I'm sure your Polish viewers and listeners will understand, but certainly it was true in Hungary. There was a massive conflict between the renamed nomenklatura, who had run things in Hungary throughout the communist era, and who had redesignated themselves great Democrats and great capitalists when it was an opportune moment. And those people who, during the communist period, were genuinely oppressed, were generally not allowed to exercise their faith, to participate in society, to participate in business. Those sort of pre-World War II parties, pre-World War II ideologies, conservatism, the land, the pastoral movements, those parties were excluded. And so what I was seeing certainly in Hungary was the old sons and daughters of the worst of the commies were all pro-NATO because they knew how to bow down. They knew how to get ahead. They knew how to keep their boot on the rest of the population by sucking up to the power, whatever that foreign power may be, that gives them the goodies they're used to. So I could see that happening in Hungary at the time, and I suspect it was happening in the other first tier extension countries. So as to the future of NATO now, and my old friend Doug McGregor, our friendship goes back to when Dr. Paul was on the Hill. He said it best when the war started this in February of 2022, which this war will end NATO, will kill NATO. And I think that is happening. And we saw a couple of days ago, the United States signaled to Germany that they do not want to have an American general in charge for the first time in 70 years. They said, "Hey, Berlin, you guys got this. You send one of your own generals. We're done with it." And I don't think it will be a nice clean break, but nevertheless, that's an indication of how much lower on the level of interest NATO is to the United States. They're just not that interested in it anymore.
Would it be fair to say that the only reason that NATO exists as something of interest to the United States is because, in very simplistic terms, the arms manufacturers need to make money?
That's it. And that and failed politicians need jobs, right? Their own people would vote them out of office. What are they going to do? The think tanks are full, have filled. They got to have some place to cool their heels. Remember Anders Fogh Rasmussen? He was the NATO secretary a couple of people back. Now he's got his own think tank, and he's come up with an amazing plan. He said, "Why are we waiting for permission? We need to put 10,000 European troops behind enemy lines in Ukraine right now, and we need to issue a no-fly zone. We need to teach those Ruskies a lesson." I mean, this is another reason why we don't want NATO. It's completely irrelevant. It's a ridiculous, it's a ridiculous forum for the biggest bullshitters out there who never have to pay the consequences. I'm laughing, but it's not funny. This is a guy who's calling for World War III. He's calling for perhaps millions of people dying because he doesn't want the he doesn't want the shame of quote backing down to Russia. Now these are the kinds of people that run it, and I think I have a lot of problems with President Trump in the second term, especially over the last 6 months. But I think one of the things to his credit is I think he realizes that the Europeans, or the people in charge of Europe right now, for the most part, not entirely. There are some bright spots, certainly in Hungary and in Slovakia and possibly in the Czech Republic, maybe a little bit in Poland as well with the president. Who knows? But he's realizing this is a loser's party, and Trump doesn't like people like that. You could just look at the contempt when he had the European leaders sitting there in the Oval Office, all sitting like good little school children. He was disgusted by it, even though he sort of perversely and maybe sadistically enjoyed humiliating them. In their humiliation, he was also teeming with disgust.
Indeed, and what a difference one meeting makes. I mean, when Viktor Orban was in the White House, I mean, he was flanked, I think, by the vice president and the president, and he seemed like a leader, almost equal to the American president. Well, at least respected. And as you mentioned, the school children who ran to Washington as soon as any semblance of rationality was communicated out of the summit between President Trump and President Putin in Anchorage. And that is a good foray into the next question I had about the current state of negotiations on the Ukraine-Russia war here as we sit on November 25th. So far, we know that the Europeans have put out their own ridiculous plan, which basically waters down a lot of the, or even nullifies a lot of some of the sensible points that were in the original 28 points. Now, President Putin has said and confirmed that the 28 points could be a basis for a discussion. So he did acknowledge there were some positive elements in it, whereas the Europeans basically came running back and tried to flip it on its head. What do you think the momentum is at this point? Should we expect any surprises before Thanksgiving or during Thanksgiving? How willing do you think the Russians are to go along with the original plan, and or what do you think Trump will say to the modifications made by the Europeans?
Well, and a hat tip to my good friend Alexander Mercurius, because he's quoted Eve Smith from Naked Capitalist, who wrote an absolutely tremendously important article. I think it was maybe last year or maybe it was earlier this year. Time is escaping me. Basically looking at this entire process as it has gone for the last couple of years, which is that the Americans and the Europeans and the Ukrainians are negotiating with each other. They're all talking to each other and modifying a plan. But Russia is nowhere to be found. Russia's not involved. Trump unveils this 28-point plan. Putin, as obviously he would, says that there could be a basis for something here, because part of it was based on the agreement they had in Anchorage, or at least the discussions they had in Anchorage, which was an agreement that would look to the root causes of the conflict, which would talk about no freeze on the line of contact, no ceasefire, temporary ceasefire, but a permanent solution to the problem, addressing Russia's legitimate security concerns, which President Trump himself has acknowledged. He has said, I get it, Russia doesn't want NATO on its doorstep. So he has gotten it. But the problem is you have Trump on one day and Trump on the other day. So what you have is you have these 28-point plan comes out. The Russians and Putin said, well, we don't have a copy, for one. We don't have a copy. We just know what we've seen in the media. It has not been presented to us. You don't just like text us. You don't send us an email, right? This is grown-up diplomacy. So no, there's some things we can talk about here. So what Trump did, and he did this immediately after Alaska, he went to the Ukrainians and Europeans, and they said, oh, no, this will never do. Let us fix it for you. And now this, at least as we're talking right now, it could change before our conversation's over. It's now been honed down to a 19-point plan. I don't know what those plans are, but if the Europeans and the Ukrainians are anywhere near it, anything that the Russians might take as a basis to begin negotiations has been completely cut out of it. So it's a non-starter. So even if Ukraine agrees to proceed according to their unilaterally modified version of it, obviously, President Putin won't be able to accept it if it doesn't have any of the tidbits that the Russians are interested in whatsoever. So it'll be the same operation all over again. Russia will say, no, well, you've taken out the parts we want to talk about. There's nothing more to talk. And President Putin himself has said it recently when he spoke to their National Security Council. This is fine. We're going to win this thing one way or the other. Either we're going to win it on the battlefield, or we will find an agreement and make an agreement that satisfies our basic existential needs in the region. So for him, it doesn't really matter,
Yeah, I think it was his words that either way, we're going to win this, which definitely does seem to be the case. I was wondering if I could.
You and I would. Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, you and I would hear that and say, well, duh, we know that. We've been following it. But enough, the entirety of the political class in the United States and in Europe would say, how dare you say that? This is unbelievable. This is outrageous. I mean, there's such a disconnect between them and reality.
Literally, I mean, the message coming out of the governing circles, and sadly, even from the presidential palace, which I hope will have a more realist outlook as President Nawrocki gets to meet with more and more world leaders. But the message of the day is in Poland that we can't have any agreements with Russia. That's the Polish opinion, because Russia is non-agreement capable. They're sort of parroting language used by the Russians, by the way, saying that Russia doesn't honor its commitments. And all you have to do is, do a simple Google search that Russia has about over 1,000 active, bilateral, trilateral, multilateral agreements. And most of them are being honored by the Russian side. I mean, we have agreements with China, India, Iran, many, many countries around the world. And obviously you'll have disputes here and there, but to say that it's a systemic factor that Russia per se doesn't honor any agreements is just a cheap way of saying, let's not talk to Russia because we don't have any other better ideas. Let's just keep this tragedy going. So yeah, I would agree with you that definitely the elites on both sides of the Atlantic would definitely go, insert bad word here, crazy, if there was a real deal to be struck. I'm also curious about, I don't know if you've seen this reporting from Tucker Carlson on his X. He mentioned, I think it was in the last 24 hours, that the Wall Street Journal is apparently sitting on a story whereby Yermak is implicated. I don't know if it's deeper in the same corruption scandal that's going on right now in Ukraine or in a different one. But the reason I'm asking that is because it would seem that since NABU, the anti-corruption organization in Ukraine, is basically Western controlled, you would sort of get the idea that the West and the United States in particular are trying to do, maybe for the first time, a good regime change operation in Ukraine this time to get Zelensky to leave. Are you getting the same sense here that he's literally being put under American pressure, Zelensky, to just leave?
I think that's the leverage. I mean, I think the Nabu thing is a leverage. I think it's being used as a leverage. I think, whenever you see sort of like a psyop, I mean, for lack of better words, I mean, you have to have a symbol of people's frustration. I think the golden toilets is the symbol of that, and it's become to be the symbol of the Zelensky regime. And even President Putin made reference to their golden toilets in Ukraine. So that's a real albatross around their neck. And I think that is a noose that can be tightened at will, as assumingly as President to. But again, we've seen this pattern of him going to the Europeans, and the Europeans. I mean, he almost had the turkey in the trap, and then he goes to the Europeans and blows it in a way. I mean, he had the momentum. He said, "Look, you're going to sign this." I was on the Duran a few days ago, and it was like the Godfather. Your blood or your brains are going to be on this contract, And then boom, it just slipped out of his fingers. And it's if I can actually just say one thing regarding Poland, which you said earlier, and I'm certainly the last person to ever speak to what Poland should or shouldn't do, but I just know in my understanding of Hungarian history that the Hungarians have also throughout history, throughout at least the last several centuries, have had numerous problems with the Russians. Every time the Austrians got in trouble under the dual monarchy with those pesky Hungarians rising up, they'd call Moscow and get it stamped down, and that even includes during the communist period, of course, in 1956 when that happened. But surprisingly and shockingly, and at least to me personally, and I've known Viktor Orban for a long time. I used to work in one of his nonprofits, but Hungary under Orban has been able to escape that sort of mental trap of we have a bad history with Russia and the Soviet Union throughout history. Therefore, we cannot talk to them any longer. And I think breaking out of that has been enormously successful for Viktor Orban. And that's why he has become, really to my surprise, because he was always a very charismatic and intelligent person. I first met him in 1992 when I was at the State Department. Who would have thought at that point that he's become a bona fide world leader? And that is exactly what he's become. And I think it's because he's been able to jettison some of these old shibboleths. And I think my personal hope, and I certainly, again, would not tell Poland what to do, but it would be nice to see if they could also jettison some of those.
I couldn't agree more, Dan, and you're spot on. And I'm saying this as a poll, but I think Barack Obama had it right in kind of a different context. But the Polish mentality can be summed up in those words that Obama uttered to Romney during one of their debates, that the Cold War is calling and wants its politics back. So a lot of Poles, unfortunately, have to get over the Cold War nostalgia and basically recognize that the world has changed, because indeed it has changed, and changed very quickly into a multipolar structure. But hopefully, as I said, our president, or newly elected president, still fresh on the job, will soon begin to realize how the world really moves, and that a lot of these, Atlanticist fantasies are the world of yesteryear and not the world of the future. Dan, moving on from Russia, I want to get your take on the situation around Venezuela, because we're hearing rumors that apparently President Trump is willing to talk to President Maduro, although we know there are factions in the White House that really want to take a hard line against Venezuela. We had Senator Rand Paul just a few days ago. I watched his interview. I think it might have been for CNN, where he says, we're killing these people on the boats. No due process. We don't know who they are. We're just saying we're at war. If we're at war, then let's declare war. If we're not, then let's stop killing these people, or at least let's board them. What's your general take on where the Venezuelan situation is heading? Can't hear you, Dan. Can't hear you. It's all right. No worries. Take your time.
Jak nie ma dźwięku, to musi się rozłączyć, połączyć jeszcze raz.
Dan, my producer is telling me to get back into the room or restart the link that I sent you. Exit and come back in.
Zamrożony, teraz już się łączy ponownie. Słuchaj,
Okej,
niech,
chyba tak
niech
było.
po prostu odpowie na twoje pytanie.
Okay.
Does that work now?
I can hear you. Okay.
Okay.
If you remember my question, go ahead, Dan, about Venezuela.
My MacBook Pro and now I'm frozen, aren't I?
A bit. Okay, you're back on.
Yeah, there's the connection between my phone. I it's hard to figure it out when we're live, or not live, but when we're talking.
No, we're not live.
You had asked a question. You had asked a question, and I started to answer it before. Oh, Venezuela.
Yeah.
Venezuela,
yes.
Oh. So the question,
basically, where we're heading in what direction, considering the fact that Trump has said he might be willing to talk to Maduro. And I mentioned also that Senator Paul was recently interviewed, where he said, we're killing these people in the boats without due process. We're technically in a war, but we haven't declared a war. If we're in a war, let's declare a war. And if we're not, let's stop killing these people. But we know there's a faction around Trump, the Latinas, so to say, who want to push Maduro harder. Where do you think Trump's instincts will go in the next few days? Because we know there is that huge armada just off the coast of Venezuela.
Well, President Trump's policy is the same problem he had in his first term, which is that personnel is the policy. And he's brought someone like Marco Rubio in to be his Secretary of State. Now, Hillary Clinton is the one who pioneered the idea that the Secretary of State is actually the Secretary of Hate. She militarized the State Department, which is very sad, because it should be the home of American diplomacy. Well, Rubio has also reignited the Secretary of Hate role. And to make matters worse, he's also the president's national security advisor, which, of course, that position was created in 1947 by the U.S. Congress. The idea behind it was to create a position that the president could turn to for national security advice that would be potentially in conflict, or would give him a fresh perspective from the other cabinet level ministers who are all Senate confirmed. So it would be more like his personal advisor. But what he's done is he's made Marco Rubio that person, as well as Secretary of State. Marco Rubio is a person who's made his entire career out of the idea of overthrowing the governments in Cuba and Venezuela. That is his big thing, despite the fact, of course, that his family is deep into narco trafficking in the region, by the way. That's ironic. And my friend Max Blumenthal is much better than I am on the history of narcotics trafficking by the Rubio family. But this is his thing. And President Trump, to this point, has not clipped his wings on it. On the contrary, as you point out, we've moved an enormous amount of military equipment to the cost of God knows how much money, tens of millions of dollars, to park off the shore, to kill people we do not know who they are. We do not know what they've done. Even if they were running drugs, that is not a capital offense in the United States. They wouldn't be subject to the death penalty, even if that's what they were doing. There are senior legal experts in the Trump administration who have warned him that this is illegal. But Trump's cronies in the Justice Department have said, don't listen to those naysayers. Keep bombing these people. And it really is a stain on the United States. So as for what Trump might do, there's one thing that Trump does not want. And he does not want to make a foreign policy action a large one and have it blow up in his face. And that's why to this point, I believe he's been dithering on it, which is fine with me. But, you know, the New York Times reported a few days ago, there was some wargaming during the first Trump administration on what would happen if they overthrew Maduro. And the result of this wargaming was absolute chaos and destruction in Venezuela, similar to the liberation of Libya that we did. So my guess is hopefully someone has briefed Trump on that, and he understands that the risks of taking military action against Venezuela are so disproportionately higher than any benefit that would come from it, that this would really be the end of his presidency in the eyes of his electorate. And yes, he's a lame duck president. He'll be out of office in a few years, but the damage it could do to the party he leads right now could be devastating.
Yeah, especially, just before the midterms coming up, I don't think he'd want a major conflagration. I mean, wars have a tendency to go not the way the American chief executive usually hopes for. I can't remember anyone that actually ended the way the chief executive ended, or at least in the details, at least not in the last maybe 60 to 70 years. But the midterms, indeed, because, next year is going to be a highly volatile year. We've seen with Zoran Mamdani in New York, and we've seen with New Jersey and Georgia, I believe, where two Democratic governors were elected, that the party is in trouble. And on the subject of Mamdani, I think you made a very interesting post. I think it was the day or the day after. I even quoted it in one of my articles on Mamdani for the Dozeche Weekly, where you said that New Yorkers didn't elect Mamdani because they're communists, but they elected Mamdani because they've had enough of Israel. And, the polls and the after polls after the election, even a CNN poll, showed that about, half of his voters actually voted for him because of the so-called Israel issue. And Sohrab Agmari actually also made the point that the way the right was going after Mamdani was pretty stupid. They were calling him a jihadist, a communist, and so on. And obviously, you could have a lot of criticisms of Mamdani. I understand, especially as someone who knows people who live in New York and experience the daily life there. But I mean, if the right or the Republicans want to win next year, it's going to take a lot more than going back to the rhetoric of a time that's long gone, jihadist, communist, that kind of rhetoric. Do you think we're in for a blue wave next year?
You make a good point about the use of hyperbolics in this whole thing. This whole idea of calling, he's basically what they, remember when AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, was elected, it was the same thing. She's a communist, she's this and she's that. She's basically a mainstream Democrat. This Mamdani, yeah, he's basically a mainstream Democrat. And it's pretty rich for Republicans to call anyone else socialist or communist, because they're just as socialist and just as communist as anyone else. But I think it's pretty clear. Mamdani ran a very different campaign. It was, more than anything, it was populist, and that was very popular. You had the scion of an old New York family running. I'm talking about Cuomo. It's give me this seat, I deserve it. And there's this great scene. There's this great scene in the debate where all the candidates were there, and they asked each one of the candidates, so when you get elected mayor of New York City, what will be your first foreign trip? And it was like a Saturday Night Live skit. I'll go to Israel. No, I'm going to Israel. I'm going to go there 4 times in a week. And it came to Mamdani, and he said, I don't want to go anywhere. I was elected by the people of New York. I want to stay here and try to fix the city. And regardless of the fact that maybe some of his ideas are not ideas that we believe would help necessarily, nevertheless, he's someone that speaks to the voter. I'm not going to go in some foreign country. I want to fix the city. That's what they want. They want the streets fixed. They want crime down. They want someone to do something about the unaffordable prices. They could not care less if he's kissing a wall, if he's kissing Netanyahu on the lips, or kissing anything else. And I think that's what happened. He's a good campaigner. And look, this terrible communist jihadist a couple weeks later was sitting there with Donald Trump playing footsie. It's bad political theater.
Indeed. Last question, Dan. I know you got to go, but I have to ask. I mean, you're in Texas. Talking to our American guests, we always try to get a feel for what are the accomplishments of Trump so far. Question for you: are you feeling the benefits of a supposedly closed border by the Trump administration? Any benefits coming down from the crackdown on illegal immigration and the very theatrical, sometimes, deportations that have taken place and are taking place in the United States?
Well, we're somewhat insulated here on the Texas Gulf Coast, and I'm too busy working nonstop to pay much attention, but I haven't seen much of a difference. I mean, there are macro problems that need to be dealt with, and busing a few hundred people, back to somewhere, God knows where. I don't know that it'll cause a problem. If Trump has indeed secured the borders, I don't like the idea of closing the borders. That's what they did in East Berlin. But if he has indeed secured the borders and we at least know who's coming in the country, then that would be a good thing. And I hope that's true. The press reporting we see shows that the illegal crossings are down, massively, down 90% plus or whatever. That's good. I'm not against immigration. I like immigration to a degree, but obviously not knowing who's coming in your country is like not knowing who's coming into your house. You got to be careful. So this may be one of the things that he's doing okay. But the methods that he's using to a large extent in some of the larger cities, I think, is very disturbing. The use of ICE, the lack of due process, which we're constitutionally guaranteed in the United States. They can't just grab you off the street and send you somewhere. You have to have due process. So there are some concerns with that, and it would be nice to see civil liberties restored in the process. But this may be one of the brighter points of the Trump presidency so far, as opposed to the Biden administration, which didn't give who comes in.
Indeed. Well, we'll be watching out for those developments here on DR Global. Dan, thank you once again for your time, and hopefully we'll be able to chat soon on the developments, which I'm pretty sure many are coming our way in the near future. Thanks again on behalf of DR Global.
Thank you for having me.